Most years when we approach the end of August, we have typically seen all of the biggest names available on the free agency market signed, which is why the period tends to be the dead zone for the NBA news season. Well, here we are with August quickly approaching its end, and while we are in that dead zone and not much is really going on lately, there is still one incredibly talented player available on the free agent market who will be the focus of today's video. See, Collin Sexton has been one of the most unfairly scrutinized and underrated young players in the NBA essentially since the very beginning of his career, and all of that has culminated to the current situation that he finds himself in. I actually made a very similar video to this last offseason because of the way that Sexton was being treated, and a year later things have seemingly gotten even worse. So in this video, I'll do a quick summary bringing you up to speed on everything that I touched on last time regarding the unfair treatment he's dealt with. Then I'll be discussing what has happened over the last year that has resulted in where he is now with no teams interested in him. And lastly, I'll be going over why I believe Collin Sexton is about to prove the entire league wrong, that he is not only worth the supposed risk, but will also end up being the biggest steal of this summer. Before we start though, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as all support is very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. Going back to where the current mess all started, back when Collin Sexton was a draft prospect in 2018, there were legitimate debates about who would prove to have a better career between him and Trae Young, and he was still a top 10 pick because of the potential that he displayed as an elite competitor that plays hard on both ends and produces as an aggressive scorer by nature. Obviously, now 4 years later, Trae Young and Luka Doncic have both taken off as established star players in the league, so those debates have been put to rest, but that doesn't just mean that Sexton has disappointed by any means. I say this all the time in my videos, but the situation that a young player comes into can greatly influence the trajectory of their careers, and sometimes a bit of luck is needed regarding what kind of environment is around you in order for young prospects to reach their full potential. Trae Young, for example, came into a Hawks team fully committed to a rebuild, and they handed Trae the keys to the team immediately. They made their intentions clear on forming plans for the future by building around him. They gave him the green light early on to play through mistakes and work through rookie struggles for the betterment of himself. And in the end, providing a perfect environment to thrive in has worked out perfectly for the Hawks. The Cavaliers, meanwhile, went a slightly different route. That 2018 offseason happened to be the offseason when LeBron James left in free agency to sign with the Los Angeles Lakers, so after 4 consecutive trips to the NBA Finals, the Cavaliers franchise was headed in a new direction. Technically, this was the year that they began to rebuild, as their ability to contend without LeBron was never really realistic. But in that first year, they weren't fully bought in yet and were more so in the transitional phase. There were still quite a few veteran players on the roster from their championship days, and after being used to success at the highest level, I can see why guys that age aren't interested in rebuilding, but the fact of the matter is that they weren't good enough to keep the team afloat competing for anything significant, and they needed to realize that their focus should have been to propel the next generation of Cavalier talent instead of knocking them down. They chose the route of knocking them down, providing a pretty unwelcoming locker room presence, and in the very first month of that season, there were already leaks to the media that those veteran players were saying that they quote-unquote didn't think Sexton knew how to play when it came to contributing to winning basketball. This is absurd for a number of reasons, but number one is obviously that, he's a teenage rookie guard. Rookie guards in the NBA pretty much always struggle to provide instant impact from the get-go, and even the best of them tend to be inconsistent as rookies, especially when they're players with a more score-first nature like Sexton, because he needs to find his footing and get comfortable with the pace of play at this level. It's pretty awful leadership by the older guys to do things like that when they themselves were largely all players on the verge of retirement who should be thanking LeBron for keeping them in the league as long as they were in the first place. After all that went down, Sexton did end up getting more comfortable out there, and those older guys started to fizzle out one by one, and by Sexton's third season in the league, he was one of the most promising young scoring talents the NBA had to offer. In that third season, Sexton averaged about 24 points per game, while shooting the ball 48% from the field and 37% from three, so both inside and out, he was putting up a lot of points, and most importantly, he was doing so efficiently. Still, despite all of this, the Cavaliers as an organization made it clear that they were skeptical about committing to him being a part of their long-term future. The two sides never came to an agreement on a contract extension. Last summer, Sexton was involved heavily in trade talks, and ultimately it didn't result in Sexton being traded, but it did become pretty clear how important last season would have been for him. The Cavaliers last season were looking ready to potentially make a playoff push, and if Sexton was able to contribute at a high level to it, then he easily would have landed himself a big payday this current offseason, as he was going into this summer as an impending free agent. Instead, the worst case scenario happened, and after just 11 games, Sexton suffered a season-ending injury. This is the biggest factor that has led Sexton to the situation he currently finds himself in now, but again, I feel strongly that he's being treated pretty harshly around the league based on how things have played out. Sure, entering free agency after sustaining a torn meniscus was obviously going to hamper how his free agency went, and after once potentially looking to play his way into a near max contract, that probably became a lot more unrealistic, but free agency has been open for almost 2 full months now, and Sexton still remains completely unsigned. Not only that, but the Cavaliers seem to be the only team to have offered him a deal so far, and it was a 3-year contract worth a total of $40 million, so it comes out to about $13 million annually. That is a long way from the level of contracts that we've seen other young players that have produced at a similar level to Sexton sign across the league recently. Just for context of how disrespectful that offer is, I'll rattle off some other players that have signed bigger contracts despite both producing far below what Sexton has shown and coming off of other potential injuries that could hamper them even further. First is Spencer Dinwiddie signed a contract worth $18 million annually when he was coming off of a torn ACL, while also never having a season as good as the season that Sexton had the last time he was healthy. Tyus Jones signed a contract worth $14.5 million annually, despite being a career backup point guard. And finally, Markelle Fultz signed a contract paying him $16 million annually, despite being possibly permanently limited from the three-point line because of his shoulder issue, while also sustaining countless injuries throughout his young career. I'm not saying that any of those players don't deserve the money that they're getting, because they do. My point is that Sexton, who is objectively better than them, is being disrespected and deserves better. From day one, Sexton's dealt with hurdles that other youngsters don't have to deal with. And now he's in a spot where he's likely going to have to accept a big pay cut in order to prove himself all over again. The Cavaliers struggled mightily offensively last season down the stretch, and even at full strength, they relied way too heavily on Darius Garland to create, so Sexton's return should, in theory, be a welcome one. I still believe in Sexton's abilities, obviously, since I'm here making this video, but the Cavaliers have never been fully invested in his development, and I would have liked to have seen Sexton find a new home this summer to start fresh. With barely any teams having much available cap space to spend in free agency, this summer, nothing really worked in Sexton's favor, so now he'll likely have to sign a smaller prove-it deal, similar to the one that Malik Monk signed with the Lakers last year, or he'll have to go back to Cleveland and re-enter a situation that doesn't value him. We'll see how it all plays out, and obviously, he will eventually sign a new contract and return to the court this upcoming season, but on that note, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think about this whole situation. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.